train your hips. If you want a better core, you better train your hips. This is something that I cover in my online 12-week program. It's a beginner's program. It's all based on the core. It's 12 weeks long, as I've mentioned. So if you want to enroll, then please do click in the link below. But otherwise, what we're trying to do here is help beginners who are getting into core training know everything that you need to know when it comes to core training. So what we're going to cover today is the joint anatomy of the hips. We're then going to compare that to the spine, and then we're going to start looking at what the exercises are and what the exercises need to look like as well. The joint anatomy. So this is telling us a story. So what we find in core training is we get lots of spine bending exercises. Exercises like sit-ups, crunches, back extensions, twisting exercises, and that is probably the least effective way of getting a strong core. Now, why do I say that? Well, I'm going to talk about the spine in the next slide, but why the hips are so important, one is because it's a ball and socket joint. This has a wide range of movement. So when we talk about movement and exercise, we want to get it from the hips and not the spine. So that's kind of number one. As you can see here, it's a ball and socket joint. So what it's able to do is there's lots of different movements. There is flexion of the hip. There is extension of the hip. There is internal rotation of the hip. There is external rotation of the hip. There is a hyperextension as well to the hip. So there's adduction and abduction, which is the ability to go in and out. So there's all these different movements from the spine, from the hips. So it's very, very important that we use that joint as to what it's, in some respects, built for. If we look at the classification that the ball and socket joint comes under, it's known as a freely movable joint. So it's free for movement. What it's also got are muscles that line it as well. And then when again we look at these muscles, the main one being, certainly when it comes to movement, is we've got this big glute max muscle here. Now this is a very strong and powerful mover. So what we need to be doing is when we are doing movement, is we need to be getting our movement from this muscle. And then what we need are a great supporting cast, as it were. And then what we've got here is, you can see glute medius above it, glute minimus, which is below glute medius, piriformis, and then the obturator group, which are these external rotators in here. So we need all of these muscles working optimally, let's say. So we've got all of these for the stability of the joint, and then we've got this big one for the power creation. When we talk about the spine next, you're going to start to understand why we need to start moving from the spine and not the hip. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to look at the joint, and then we're going to look at the joints, and then we're going to look at the muscles. Now, I've already stated that sit-ups, crunches, back extensions, twisting exercises are poor exercise choices for core training. We need to train the hips. Why have I said that? Well, so far I've said that the hips are freely movable joints, and it's a ball and socket joint. All of these joints in here are known as cartilaginous joints. And these cartilaginous joints are classified as slightly movable joints. Now, this doesn't mean they can't move, because they can. But what it does mean is that they shouldn't be, or that shouldn't be their primary function, which is to create movement. Their primary function should be able to support movement from the hips and from the shoulders. So their main function is to prevent movement, and then let's just say their secondary function is then there to support movement if needed, i.e. in a golf swing or so on and so forth. But the power that is created in that golf swing is done from the hips, supported by the spine. So we kind of first need to understand that, and that in some respects comes from understanding how the joint is classified without even looking at the muscles. So it's a cartilaginous joint, which is a slightly movable joint, which isn't effective for movement creation. What we then do is we can then look at the muscles. Now again, the muscles aren't big, powerful movements. If we go right down to the level of the vertebra and we look at the muscles that go from these little pointy bits are known as spinous processes or transverse processes. Certainly the ones on the outside anyway. Now, these muscles that go in between all these little bony protrusions, they have a lot of sensors in them. Now, these sensors are there just to detect the position that the spine is in. They're not there to create movement. They're not there for contraction and strength. They are there their primary function, I should say, is to understand the position of the spine. As we then start moving out, these bigger muscles here are there to try and stabilize the spine. So they are there to anchor down the spine to the pelvis. So again, what we're looking at is not big spine movers. We are looking at spine stabilizers. And this is something that we need to understand. So what we're now going to do is start looking at some exercises where we can start training the core. So what do these exercises look like? Well, we need to start simple and then we can start moving into a little bit more complex. So I've got some relatively simple exercises which can help anyone build their core or build their hips so their core can be supported much better. We've got standard bridge. So again, by lifting and extending the hips in this position, your glute max will engage. You can then add a resistance band around the knees, bring the feet wider, and that will engage the glutes. What we can then do is come into this type of exercise where you can see here, or you may not be able to see, but I've got a band around my feet and I'm stepping to the side. So this is now starting to get into the side of the hips a little bit more and isolating those muscles off and getting those muscles to work a little bit more effectively as a supporting cast for the glute max at the back. What I'm then starting to do is add a bit more in the way of what could be described as like a functional type of movement. So I've got a lifting exercise here. This is a little bit harder because it's a single leg stand, so it's a little bit harder. This is a little bit more simple because it's a double leg stance. So as I go down, my hips go back. As I stand up straight, my hips come forward. And as my hips come forward, I'm able to engage my glutes and make sure that those are working properly. So it's very important with regards to the exercises that we're choosing, that we choose the right ones, not only where we can isolate and feel those muscles working, but we need to do it in a way that is, in some respects, logical. So they need to start off basically simple and move to a more complex. We need to be engaging glute max, glute medius, glute minimus, the external rotators, and we can do that using resistance bands and certain other techniques that we can use by screwing the feet into the floor, pushing the feet apart, spreading the floor, all these different types of things. So understand that when it comes to core training, what we need to do is train the hips, move from the hips and not the spine. So hopefully this has been of help to you. Hopefully it's given you a better idea of how to go about core training. If you want to get started with core training, hit the link below and get enrolled in the program. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Chris Whole Training. I'll speak to you in a future tutorial.